invest in quickly.
Level 3 is there.
So I thought meanwhile we can use the time introduced better.
Scaling for the world by income.
We'll start with Caspian, which is and then launched a subsequent one 2008, which again did invest in financial institutions. In 2018 launched the SME fund, which invests in Ravi sitting there in the back. Some of the unusual good mix, I think. Can somebody help me here? Then when Infosys grew really large, I sort of got bored. My last stint there was in their corporate strategy, and I joined the microfinance company where I was raising multiple rounds of equity along with the promoter. And then after microfinance, not a career equity investor, but actually a person who has been in your shoes at times as well, where I have been institution I was working with. So with that, let's get started. But please understand that it is a costly decision. The decisions which you and your entrepreneur were taking up till, you as an entrepreneur were taking up till now, along with your co-founder, now those decisions will be subject to the board scrutiny of the shareholders at times. So you lose a bit of independence. There is also this risk that if your startup does very well, then the path is relatively clear. If your startup is not doing well, then also actually this path is reasonably clear. It's painful, but it is clear to everybody. But unfortunately, number of companies end up somewhere in the middle. And at that time, after some time, entrepreneurs start getting bored, but it's then feels like a endless treadmill because you can't get, but depends on multiple factors and it's not always so easy. The last point is that on this slide is which I want to spend some time and then start getting into the main theme, is that eventually all investors will want liquidity and an exit. As you're getting into an equity partnership, it's not like you're choosing your life partner, but it is pretty close. And you have to live with them for 5 years. I had an example of a company which was helping into training of various options, and they had a very large base of potential investors available. So they quickly went and raised 3 crores from 30 investors, each of them subscribing to 10 lakhs each. And they were very happy. And then subsequently, few months later, some of those investors started asking them, okay, what about my exit? When I'm going to get the exit? And as an entrepreneur, sometimes we want to raise funding very quickly and may take the first funding which is available, but an easiest way may not work out. Unfortunately, in the medium run for you, it may create actually more pain for you. So I just, while it's a difficult process, I just want to tell you about the other side of that you should consider as well. So now rest of the presentation primarily would talk about this constant battle you are going to have is how frugally you want to run and when you want to really spend and scale up. Because that's, I think, one of the important judgment points, and it's not always easy. As Indians, we tend to be conservative in terms of raising money, in terms of spending money, and we at Caspian ourselves believe in that philosophy. Of late, we have seen will raise a lot of equity upfront, invest heavy amount upfront, to build a big scale institution so that you can grow quickly and conquer the market. Important strategy, very useful. The main judgment is that whether you're ready to go for it or your product or service still need a bit of fine tuning before you jump into that big league. Because if you jump a bit early, then of course it's a recipe for disaster. So, and in terms of for your first round of funding, if you go to seed programs, if you go to, later on I have put a list of some programs which are the government schemes for investing into early stage equity as well. They will invariably try to have some representation on your board if they are investing equity. In case of a grant, not always, but you can request. So, through we at Caspian sit on multiple boards, and sometimes these government nominees are our peers on the board. And at Caspian, what we have seen is the government sun will rise and you will see the grant. And it has happened more often than actually you would think, because you should just fill the form, submit it and forget about it. And someday you will get some request for information and they will call you, and if you go, we have seen many such cases when people have ended up with the grant and even equity programs in such cases. So think about it seriously, but don't put a lot of energy daily into it. Go with the method which get involved in Shark Tank, but at the same time, again, getting an intern, starting a bit of visibility for yourself is something which always helps. But it's a different topic. Let me just stay with it. Yeah, please. I'll take like to grant almost always will come for with riders. So they would, when you will apply itself, they will tell you that if it's a state grant, like Karnataka has some grants, they will say that whatever work or you are doing, it should be involved. There should be some reference to the Karnataka, like either a supplier or a customer or the community you are helping with, etc. should belong to that region. If you are working on an IP related to biotech, they will ask you either to patent or allow some uses which is in the larger use. So, but generally they will always any restrictions or commitments you have to make. No, DST has some grant programs, but I mean you can go just look on their websites.
Is ideation the best stage?
Is ideation the best stage to go for grants? So first of all, any stage is good for grant, because grant is sometimes is a free money. So, but ideation is the most important, of course. You may not have sufficient substance at the ideation time to get the grant. There are very few grants available at the paper stage unless you have something to show. So, while it may seem like a good place, you may not actually get it. Any other? Yes, please.
You said that you can employ an intern to help you out with the filling of the forms. So typically, what kind of colleges should approach?
Any finance or management with finance, accounting, commerce. So generally, I would suggest you take a postgraduate. So any MBA program, MCOM program, economics, because most of the questions are usually on two sides. One are the questions on what is your thesis, strategy, etc. That is less complex to answer, for want of a better word. But sometimes, like, there will be questions about your economic model, questions related to that. Cash flow, which will require some technical. Okay, so moving on to debt, and that is an important question because when you take debt, the biggest advantage is that you will not get diluted. So, as you are building your startup, if you take too much of equity upfront at a lower valuation, the obviously downside is that you will have very little stake left. We have had very successful entrepreneurs who by the time the company went public had less than 2% stake left in the company, which of course it depends on how the company is done. That 2% may be very much worth as compared to 100% of a very small company. But at the same time, if you can prevent that dilution early on, and the easiest way is if you can take some loan. And some of these loans are also soft loans. So it's not, of course, what are the key considerations? There are three. So if you're taking a loan, you will have to service the loan. You will have to either pay, you will have to most likely pay monthly interest and the principal back at some point of time. So whether your business is cash flow positive or as in finance terms they say EBITDA positive, etc., so that you can service the loan is an important criteria. And frankly, in my view, the only criteria. If you can service the loan, then you should try to take the loan. The second point which is required is again, lot of times when you are taking debt, the institutions will ask you for a personal guarantee. So when I am negotiating from the point of the institution, I will also ask you to give personal guarantee. But when I am on your side, I will tell you never give personal guarantee. Because the implications of personal guarantee is that you will come personally liable and the loan which has been taken by the entity, you have allowed the lender to go after you in case the entity is not able to return the loan, which can be disastrous for you, for your personal finances. Even if you are doing very well today, this is a risk you need not take, is my view. If it's an exception situation, you think you can close the loan very quickly, you have a very good, like an order is stuck, a payment from a customer is stuck, you need invoice financing, short-term financing, maybe you can take that risk because you have very good visibility and the chances of probability is very low. But other than that, I wouldn't recommend giving personal guarantee. The third one is the point related to fixed assets. Mostly when you will go and apply for the loan, some of the especially old school lenders are going to ask you for fixed assets. Do you have any plant, equipment, machinery which you can pledge to me? If you don't have it, do you at least have inventory that I can take charge on? And generally what we have seen is in the new businesses that we see in the startup, there wouldn't be anything. You would be very well working on an asset-light model. I've earlier told that don't even take office on rent, work with one of the incubators. So forget about having any fixed asset early on in your. So that is a requirement which now many, and I will have names a bit later on, but that is a requirement we have seen now getting waived. People will start, lenders will ask you if you have an asset, and they will push you a bit on the basically they have now started using it as a negotiation tool for the interest rates. So they will say if you have some asset, you give it to me, I'll give the loan to you 2% cheaper, etc. But beyond that, that requirement we have seen gets waived, only exception being public sector bank, but private players are mostly able to waive this requirement if you negotiate well. Earlier called CGT MSE scheme, now it is called Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under this scheme, they gave a loan of 2 crores, generally up to 2 crores, although there is no limit. And the banks actually have some targets on that. So it's not as hard to get this loan. The only issue again is usually the paperwork and the process. So which you will have to figure out and how to tackle that. So I just was thinking about the easiest way is if in your contacts there is a retired bank manager, bank staff member from public sector bank, you ask them for the guidance on how you can get this loan. That because for folks who know how to get it, it is doable. But if you are coming new and you have to understand what the banks want and again the paperwork required, it can get very frustrating. So just starting off, then that will be. Okay. Yes, please.
Do you suggest that startups should take a mortgage loans?
Let me just explain the question and why it is an interesting question. Because if you are mortgaging your asset of house, etc., the interest rate on that loan can be 10% right now, maybe slightly less than that in the 9-10%. So we have seen even cases where an entrepreneur coming from the grassroots really had no funds, and you have to obviously put some of your funds into the company to get started. So I have seen cases where the entrepreneur just mortgaged the house and used those funds to put equity into the institution. But I should also say that this was the case of 8 years back, and the entrepreneur almost had nothing to lose. So, will determined folks do that? The answer is yes, because obviously then it means the implication is that if the company doesn't work out, then he will lose his house also. So you are in a situation where there is no company, there is no house, and that is not obviously a good situation to be in. But ultimately it comes down to the risk you are willing to take and the sources which you have available. But if you have a business where the cash flows are predictable and you know that the loan is not really risky, then it is the cheapest loan available. And the risk in taking such a loan may be low in that case. So it's a good question actually. Because for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's the most important item of funding which is available. But I would not recommend it being used as a first or the second option, more like a last option.
There's an irony. The investors usually which become, they'll say we want to invest in your product company or something. We don't want to do services. And then when we talk about cash flow for a startup, it's usually the services which keeps us going before our product goes in.
No, it's a very good question. So if you are building something like an IP, which a lot of people say that the IP businesses can grow very fast, very quickly, but they are more risky because there will not be any cash flows available initially. The services business, from that point of view, may be less risky because there are cash flows available initially, but then it will take more time to scale because you have to, in services business, build one by one. You cannot like overnight create branch offices or create or expand the distribution.
But that helps us to sustain.
That is true. So there is no easy answer to that. I mean, we are all adults here, so investors will always ask you the best option in everything, but that is not feasible at times. So depending on the characteristics of business is how you have to construct the funding plan. If you are an IP-based business, then it is not recommended then to take loan.
So is that because it's easier to scale a products business than a service business, so that's why they
Generally, yes. Generally, an IP-based business can scale up very quickly as compared to a services business because it requires distribution system. You have to put sales force in place, service mechanism in place.
Margin is comparative.
It depends. Yeah, comparatively. So,
On the note of personal guarantee and fixed assets, you recommended not going that avenue, right? Because when you start out, they are not good places to put like assets. You won't have a personal guarantee is not a good place to be in. So alternatively, the bank will be looking for some kind of guarantee from our end, right? So what would be a good?
no, so bank, that's what I was telling. Sorry, I'll come back to the question on equity also. But everybody here is alert. Nobody is going to force you into anything. The only important item is you should know the risk of what you're getting into. So when the bank is going to ask you for the personal guarantee, they may say, if you give the personal guarantee, I'll give you loan at 14% or 13%. If you don't give the personal guarantee, I'm going to charge a percent more. If I am in your shoes, I will not give the personal guarantee. But there's somebody else who may say, I want to save money and I want to give the personal guarantee. But you should be aware of what is the risk. Do you want to add something?
So the personal guarantee is basically a different animal. If you agree to that, it sets a precedence. The lender who asks for personal guarantee generally would like to continue that. On top of even the other lenders who would like to lend, they'll ask for personal guarantee. So we should be able to say no, it's a difficult one, right in the beginning. Otherwise, that goes on and on. Even if the company becomes 500 crores, they still keep on asking for personal guarantee.
That's a very good point. You're setting a precedent. Business loans. But PaySent is the biggest one, where they are giving business loans and they have a platform model. So many investors give money to them and many retail debtors give money to them. And they invest that money into your company as debt. And these loans will be 1 year kind of tenor. So the platform players, the tenor is a bit low. With private players, you can get 2 years, 3 years also. Another advantage of taking the loan is that you are also starting the history of your organization. Because as you start even a small credit limit with a public sector bank or a loan, that data gets fed into credit bureau, and then tomorrow when you need a second or a third or fourth loan, that history helps. So let's go to the next. So any questions which are left on debt before I will come back to the equity related questions?
Are you going to discuss offshore debt?
Because this is startup space, I didn't think so much about the external commercial borrowing, which is the primary route for offshore. So I'm not sure if it is relevant to most of the audience, but if you want to talk about it, we have done several ECBs with RBI approval, and I am happy to talk after the session. Because I don't think it will be relevant at this stage for most of the audience right now. It's only after you reach a certain scale that you can raise external commercial borrowings, which require RBI approval during the process. It's forthcoming. It's not difficult to get that approval, but you have to work with an authorized dealer bank, etc. So I just thought that is something you can look at a little later in the life cycle. Any other questions on that?
On the government programs, you have mentioned Kerala and Rajasthan. Is there any program in Telangana?
I am actually not aware of a Telangana program right now. I was looking for it, but not right now. I know Assam government is going to announce one, but nothing like that.
Defund is there for Telangana. Defund.
Do you know the details?
Is there on the website?
Okay. Yeah, so the participant here is saying, sir, what is your name?
See.
Yeah, so Sridhar is saying that there is a tea fund in Telangana. I'm not aware of the T fund.
Mansi, who's moving around here, she's the person heading it.
Okay. And the contact person for that is Manasi. Good. I am going to know something.
Which department?
T-fund.
It's part of THub innovation.
So apparently it's equity. Do you know more details, like what size amounts they gave or sectors or?
The conditions being that it has to be recurring products, running operations. Size typically it's around 10
40.
crores.
All the
10 to 15
Lakhs.
lakhs. Okay.
But we'll go through its own panel of selection.
Yes, everything we are mentioning will go through like that.
So, which is better for a startup, like a limited liability one or nothing?
So why would you do unlimited liability? I can't see any argument to do unlimited liability.
Because unlimited, because it's just a startup stage and we will not, because we don't have any funds with us, and the banks will also be asking us for a personal guarantee.
No, I think registering a company now is relatively cheap and easy. I don't. That used to be the hurdle few years back. That registering a company takes a lot of effort, etc. But once you are going out formally, our recommendation is now to register a company. Till the time you are at ideation stage, you are doing some internal development, etc. Then it is fine. But and it used to be a consideration earlier, but now. Ravi, have you seen any examples when you would not register a company?
So basically, the startup which we've registered is still in the stage of ideation. So that is the reason why we are looking out for options.
Yeah, see, if you are just ideation, you are not dealing with vendors or dealing with customers, not dealing with investors, then till that time everything can work on a handshake and it's probably okay.
But we've got an investment opportunity, but then we're still skeptical about it because it is still an ideation stage. We're validating the ideas.
Sure. But to give a specific advice, I'll need to know a little bit more. But in general, you should incorporate a company or LLP. But mostly a company.
So related to this, somebody asked whether Telangana has it's not Telangana specific, but Telangana based. This is the AIDEA program based out of NAM, National Academy for Agricultural Research Engineering. So they give it's basically for agtech, agri-agtech, biotech based initiative. The funding can vary between 50 lakhs to they do it every year.
But it's only for everything.
So now we're coming to the part related to equity. Let me check how we're doing on time.
We have time.
So in equity, as an entrepreneur, the decision goes usually like this. First you try to find angel investors. In my view, angel investors are the easiest. Some of them you will approach through your contacts, through your various networks. There are now angel investors who are quite well known, and they also publish the areas they invest into, like Mr. Mohandas Pai invest into ex-Infosys, invest into internet, technology, consumers, kind of businesses. Vinny Bansal from Flipkart fame again invests into a variety of, we have seen his investments into dairy, into technology, like a variety of areas. So usually I think most entrepreneurs start their journey with an angel investor, which are now quite becoming common through the various networks. But one of our advice is, and this is based on again feedback from the entrepreneurs, is that there are also some angel network platforms like Mumbai Angel, Indian Angels, Let's Venture, Succeed Venture, etc. Uh, and sometimes they operate as a platform, sometimes they operate as a what's called AIF Category 1 fund, which is what Let's Venture does. If you work from one of these systematic setups, that
She's the lady.
okay, so everybody knows Mansi, she just walked past for T fund. So, the working with systematic angel funds, the advantage is again the board management and the investor management. You can raise angel funding from multiple angels. People will put 10 lakhs, 25 lakhs. Each of them would want to know various items. Initially may appear okay to raise that funding, but the management of these investors become problematic as your life will go on. If you are working with an AIF category 1 like Let's Venture, Succeed Venture, etc., they would have a lead investor. And that investor will serve on your board. That investor will have obviously contributions of many investors behind him. But for you, the investor management becomes easier because generally this person would be a bit more matured. They would know you are not going to get liquidity in 5 years. It's an unlisted space. Again, an important consideration.
Can I have the names, please? What you said that?
Obviously, Mumbai Angels, Indian Angels, Let's Venture, Succeed Venture. I think I had good feedback about few other names as well. There's one Ecosystem Ventures as well. Yeah, but Bloom is again a little more seed fund. They will come into they will come into the next category of what we call as AIF category 2. So like Caspian has an agri fund or Bloom fund. So when you get into AIF category 2 fund, they would usually be a bit more commercial, not just seed. They can do seed, but they will take you at certain distance usually. They will look at investments up to 15, 20, 25 crores. Whereas the AIF category 1, which I was telling earlier, would usually invest 25 lakhs, 50 lakhs, 1 crore, these kind of amounts. 100x. Programs again require a bit of effort, but have the advantages which I was mentioning earlier, where the board member will be a bit more benign, and it is difficult to get this funding, difficult in the sense of effort, but the board management and the investor management is easier.
Can you think of any good names of investors in the human resource side of the technology space? Because these are all different from the microbusiness that I'm in.
So there are schemes in the technology space, but I can't, which I can come back to you. But especially on the human resource side, I can't recall immediately. But there are technology programs, there are many schemes. So once maybe we talk and I know a little bit about what your exact venture is, whether it's platform or what it is. DST, DPIT are there, but again, then you have to go down into details of whether your platform will qualify. There's one point which I wanted to make in the previous slide, which was generally as you are raising the equity from, you have to see the alignment of the sectors. Of course, everybody knows that and the ticket size. One of the important items to also ask is when is the fund ending its fund life? Which is a question which I have not seen being asked that often. If a fund which is life is 8 years, 7 years, 10 years, then it's an attractive fund for you to bring on board. If the fund has 2 years left, which means that after 2 years they will ask you for an exit, and which is usually very difficult if you are in the early stage. So that situation is also a situation which I have seen happening, and it's not very pleasant situation for the entrepreneur.
Do we need commit anything for the exits like this one status?
No, not for equity.
How the exits happen?
So typically the way exits will happen is in unlisted space is a new investor will actually buy the stake of an older investor. Because it is unlikely that you will be able to carry the company till IPO, although it has happened to us few times. But investing in seed or Series A and waiting till the company goes IPO is very long period usually. What typically happens is an investor coming into Series B, C, D will buy these investors. The issue for you will be if a new investor coming in Series C is willing to put 50 crores, you want that 50 crores to come to the business. But if somebody from Series A wants to sell and they want 10 crores, then 10 crores is actually getting diverted to the Series A person, and you will get only 40 crores.
How do you determine the level of equity dilution in C1 stage, especially when valuation itself is not very clear?
That's a class in itself. If you want to discuss the valuation in the unlisted space of early stage, I think that's a separate 1 hour class. I mean, it requires but it's both an art and a science, but yeah. But again, probably very much outside the scope of this class.
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that when the fund, the venture capital guys raise a fund to the investors, it has a certain lifespan within which it has to give money
Back to its investors.
back to its investors.
Correct.
And you still say that they will go on throughout the life of the fund, continue to disperse even though they know that the maturity stage will be after 5 years. And in the third year itself, maybe if it is 5 years, in the third year they will still continue to disperse the loans.
Yes, they will.
But then, wouldn't that be 3 plus 5 years? And yet they'll have to give it back.
That's correct, exactly. And that is the reason why I'm telling you this. Let's say if somebody starts an 8-year fund, typically the fund would have first 3 years as the investment period. So that they can invest in first year, that company will be lucky, it will get 7 years of the fund to utilize the fund. If they invest in the third year in the same company, that company will get 5 years, which probably is also fine. But there are also funds which we know which go further. Caspian doesn't do it, but there are funds which will keep going. I have seen a fund investing when it had 3 years left. And after that they started asking company, okay, 3 years are over, now give me my exit. And
So generally, it will not come as a surprise because it's a slight deviation from the current topic, but since it's coming up, in a shareholder agreement, you generally mention the timeline to exit. You will know that at that point.
you will be required to help that you don't generally have an obligation, but it becomes a messy situation.
Yeah.
So the need for the entrepreneur is to find out the latest released fund.
Latest release funds, all funds which have long fund life left. You can just, politely you can just ask that how much fund life is left. It's a simple question and the other person has to answer. They also are putting money and equally responsible for this part. So, on equity you had a couple of questions. So again, there was a question on how much you should give a party which is collaborating, and again that comes back to the valuation question. So it's not an easy question to answer unless you know all the facts about the case. Really depends on how much value they are bringing. It's very hard to give like a generic answer for that kind of. So now just last instrument which I want to cover is, yeah, please.
The investors, will they help us in marketing the, like growing your business? Since you are putting the money in your company?
Yeah, so there are investors who do that in the sense that so there are two types of marketing, right? One marketing is that, for example, there are many companies which want Ratan Tata, and the Ratan Tata family office it's difficult to get good valuation from them. Because what they say is one of the advantages we bring is that you can say that Ratan Tata is on your board, and hence we want like a good valuation from you. So one is that just implicit. If you get somebody who is very senior, that helps in the credibility of the company right there. But most VC funds will make it a point to either in the conferences take a good portfolio company along, or help them in other softer aspects of marketing, if not explicit marketing. Like if your business is one which requires explicit marketing, then the suggestion is you get like an ex-Ogilvy guy onto your board who can help you. But yes, that is something which VC funds do in a soft way.
They do it.
So I want to just touch on the last item just for the sake of completion, is that we are hearing about this venture debt and tier 2 also in the market. Venture debt typically is a type of debt which gets converted into equity, or as an option to get converted into equity, is the way the agreements are written. So you pay, it's like a blended thing. You pay a certain either interest or some kind of fees upfront, and then later on, depending on certain criteria, the debt will get converted into an equity. You may not have to pay back the principal back. Typically, three important names: Innovate, Trifecta, Alteria, which we have seen doing most of the deal making. But the deal making is happening at a slightly at a company which is slightly bigger in size in terms of revenue, the history of increasing revenues for past 3 to 4 years, and should have done some rounds of equity before you can get a venture debt. Otherwise, I would think it's a bit difficult. Similarly, there is an instrument called Tier 2 capital, which in a balance sheet would qualify as a subordinated debt. And I'd rather going more technical again. There are government schemes for that, but I think raising that is very difficult. So for this audience, I just want you to be aware that as you grow further, there's something like this which is available, but probably I would not attempt it in the initial phase.
What's the difference between tier 2 capital and normal loans which banks take?
So a tier 2 capital is in the order of priority subordinated to the loan. So if the company is not doing well, the loans will get paid first, and then the residual amount will go to the tier 2 capital. So but it has to be at least for a tenure of 5 years, and there are other qualifying criteria which are required. So it's a bit difficult to raise in the early stage.
Are these institutions really doing this tier 2 capital financing?
Very few cases. So that is why I'm saying
Never really came across that as something which is...
no, we have seen it, but mostly you get it more easily from the offshore, from the foreign investors than Indian. And there also you need a bit of, like I said, financial statements for a few years. You should have done some rounds of equity. You have to have a certain size before you can attempt that as an instrument.
It has to be unsecured, so that's the biggest.
So tier 2 capital you're saying is unsecured? It's
It
not-
is unsecured.
Which means the interest rate is going to be pretty high.
Interest rate is high, yes. But by the time, because the institution is bigger, so the lending rate may again come back to around 15%. Because a smaller institution cannot raise it, a larger institution can raise it when its debt is at 11-12%. The lending rate for a larger institution may be 14-15%.
I'll connect with you offline.
Sure, that is fine. So just in terms of the final slide on the decision tree on the financing. First question is that how much financing you want to raise now? Can you do with less, or do you want to build a scale and do the financing now? We covered debt, equity, venture debt, and tier 2. Debt, something which is becoming easier to raise if your financial statements, cash flow positions allow for raising debt, then please consider it. It's an important item to consider. The equity, do look at government schemes. Don't take the first angel investor you meet as an investor. I know it's hard, but I think it's useful if you build some sector specialists and think about management of the board and investors later on. As you grow in size, you can look at venture debt and tier 2 equity, subordinated debt, which are the other instruments which are available. We briefly mentioned about external commercial borrowing, which again, if you are raising loans from offshore, then that's an instrument to use, and you usually have to take help of an authorized dealer bank. So if you go to a bank and ask them to help out, if it's a debt which is big in size, they will usually do. But like I said again, if there's an interest, we can talk in more details. So with that, we can conclude the sessions. I can continue taking questions if there are any. I and Ravi are still around. So any specific cases? Yeah, please.
It's not more of a generic kind of current situation which we are hearing. There are strong rumors that is going to be a recession. How is it going to impact in this domain?
Yeah, so raising equity in some sectors will become difficult. I think the question is, you are seeing some negative news in the media these days. All the central banks are now increasing the interest rates, and the effect it has is that the money supply in the economy gets lowered. So without going to the technical side of it, what we will anticipate is that businesses which have good cash flows, solid foundation, will continue to keep seeing the investor interest. But we also at Caspian have a house view that there was also a little bit of bubble building up into the startup space, where a number of institutions which did have sufficient solid foundations was trying to raise equity either in public market or private market through a bit of hype. That will become difficult. If you currently don't have the financial statements which support the valuations which you are aiming for, and trying to raise funding only on idea, then that actually will become a bit difficult. So one of our portfolio companies, which we are a fund we are managing, but based out of Bangladesh, raised SoftBank funding last year, and after the recent write-off, SoftBank has completely currently paused. So what happens at the top tier of the funds trickles down, but at the same time, in startup space with good ideas, I don't see it will happen. Yeah, we are continuing to. So it's not a macro. That's not a macro story.
I look at your charts and I'm like, is money chasing the entrepreneurs? Is entrepreneurs chasing money, or
It's both ways.
of them?
It's both ways.
So have you found out the formula finally how to, what is a successful entrepreneur, how to identify that guy?
No, it's not a tick mark formula. If we knew that formula, then believe me, then why to put all the effort? So I'll close the session now. I and Ravi are available, and we can take that questions one-on-one now, because I think most of the questions